Okay, so let's go over the translation practice for lesson 15. Some of you haven't turned it in yet. I need to get this up there anyway for those who have. There's a long process that I have to go through to actually get it uploaded, reduce the file, and then it takes a while to actually get it on the internet. So this will actually go up hours after I record it, by which point most people probably have done it. But anyway, I'm looking at 5 students, I think, who have done it. So I'm looking at your results. And I want to just gently encourage you to work hard on these assignments. This wasn't a quiz. You could use your book and other stuff like that. And you really do need to read the chapter carefully. And I think I think we see some evidence where we could be a little bit more careful in our reading of the chapter in the way which the questions were answered. So let's go through that. So first, and this is just important things you need to know, but it's also, did you read the chapter? Or can you go back and find it in the chapter? True or false, the present, imperfect, passive, and middle endings are the same, making it absolutely impossible to tell the difference. The only thing you can do is guess. That's obviously wrong, and I'm glad that all of you have selected that. Okay, but this one, what preposition is most likely to communicate agency in the passive? Remember, agency is going to say the subject, or tell, not the subject, the agency is going to tell who is actually performing the action, right? Because with a passive voice, the action is being performed on the subject, right? I am being studied, or something like that. That is a passive sentence, and I would need to say something like, I am being studied by the doctor, or something like that. And that by the doctor is the one who's actually performing the action. So in passive sentence, you don't get the subject right there at the beginning of the sentence stating who is actually, you don't get the performer of the action stated right there in the beginning of the sentence. You have to see the one doing the action is indicated in a phrase, a prepositional phrase, usually by. Now, what preposition in Greek is used to communicate that passive, that the agency, who's actually doing the action? And the answer is hupo there, and that is seen clearly in your book in this section. Here it goes, often a passive in Greek has the equivalent of by following it to specify who done it. This is called the agent construction. In Greek, this is most often expressed by the preposition hupo. So right there, it tells us hupo is the preposition that most often communicates the agency in a passive sentence, which when used with a genitive case object of the preposition tells us who the personal agent is who performs the actions referenced by the verb. So here, for instance, 2 Corinthians 1:4, this we see is a passive, first person plural. We are being comforted by God. So that by God, hupo ton theon, communicates the agency. And the altoi is intensification, so it's we ourselves are being comforted. So I can't remember if we learned that form yet or not. So yeah, the point here is that hupo typically communicates agency. So in this sentence, who is performing the agent? Well, it is God. God is performing the agent. You could put this in active voice that says, and it would be God comforted us. God comforted us. But that's would be active voice. Passive voice, we are being comforted by God. And hupo is a Greek preposition that often means by, so it's very similar to how the English construction works. Okay, here's another question. All passives have an agent marker. So do all passives have something like what we just saw, where it tells you who the who the agent in performing the action is by a prepositional phrase? Well, a lot of you thought true. The answer is, most of you thought true, but the answer is actually false. And look here. Here's this in your book, passives without an agent marker. So there are some passives that obviously don't have an agent marker, and the context would have to supply who that is. Okay, so not all passives are going to explicitly tell you who's actually doing it in that sentence. Sometimes you get context, or sometimes it's just, the emphasis is not at all on an active agent who's doing it. We want to understand that this something had been done to something else, and so we don't have any indication of who the agent is at all. So the answer is clearly false, because we have a whole section on here on passives without an agent marker. Okay, now we move into the parsing, and you guys did generally pretty well with this. And so here we have katharidzontai, and how do we parse that? Well, it's passive, passive middle, which we know from this ontai ending. And if we look down here, it's third person plural. That is the third person plural passive ending. Don't confuse that with second person or third person singular. Etai, third person plural, is ontai. I remember that by recognizing that, well, here we have what? 2 letters. The epsilon, we have 1 letter. So the ontai is plural because, it's a longer ending. That's my silly way to remember the difference between etai and ontai. But if that works for you, that's great. If not, you can figure out another silly way to remember them. Often the sillier, the better. Okay, next one. Baptizomai, and here we have the amai. The personal ending, the omicron is the connecting vowel, and that's pretty obvious. It's the first one, first person singular. So the translation here is, I forgot the translation in the last one, but this one, the word means baptize. Baptizo is I baptize. So baptizomai is I am being baptized. And kathridzo is to make clean. So the third person plural would be something like, they are being made clean. Again, when they are being made clean, the they are not the ones who are performing the action. The action is being done to them. Okay, and then just for fun, I threw this one in here too. I need to do more of this to get us thinking, because you need to remember this as we go. Gnosken. That is not a passive voice at all. It's a present active infinitive. And we looked at that way back many, many, many lessons ago. And if you see this N ending here, the present active infinitive of luo is luain, to loose. So that ain ending is the marker of the present active infinitive. So please don't forget this material as we go through. And I need to do more of just giving you some things that we did a long time ago so that you can recognize what they actually are. Okay, moving on to, sorry, I do that from time to time just to make sure this is actually recording. More than one occasion, I've gotten to the end of a lecture and realized that I didn't actually record. So that's just a little security I have to make sure it's continually recording, or sometimes it just drops out part way. I will be so thankful when we can come back to class. Okay, so here's a sentence, and this is Mark 15:24. And here is what it says. So it's starting right here. Kai Strauulsen, Auton kai dia meridzontai ta hamatia autu. Okay, and how do we translate that? Well, let's start looking, and we need to think about, well, who is the subject, right? Who's the subject of the sentence? And so this, and I gave you a few clues here because of words. So I wrote down the word, I gave you the words, the vocabulary words in here that are not in the glossary. If it's in the glossary, you had to look it up in the glossary because you can flip pages. You can do that, and that helps you. If it's not in the glossary because you guys don't have lexicons, I gave you what the word actually is. And so I don't believe this word was in the glossary. This is the word to crucify, or I crucify. Now, a few of you, actually many of you, in your translations, you put I crucify. Now, at first I was totally baffled why you did that, and then I realized that, well, I put I crucify here. But notice, pay attention to the endings. Straurao is I crucify, right? And that omega ending, the O ending, is the first is first person singular, which is I. Now, this ending here, usen, is it first person singular? Absolutely not. It is the usen, which you should remember that was one of the first things we covered, is its third person plural. Remember, we go o, ace, a, amen, eta, usi, or usin. The n is the new is sometimes there, sometimes not. So this is third person plural. It's not I crucify, it's they crucify. They crucify him, and then this word here, which I told you means divided, divided the garments of him, divided his garments. Now, the question is, so this is a middle or passive ending. You draw that circle a bit bigger so they don't cut off the letters. We can see it. Not the zeta, but it's the anti. So we have anti, and that's the pretty easy for. Pretty easy for us to see. We're dealing with that ending there. But it could be middle or it could be passive. Remember, the middle is going to emphasize that the subject doing the action is performing that action and it has a particular effect upon them. So often verbs that talk about thinking would be passive, would be middle, not passive. And that is because when you're thinking, you are actually doing something to yourself as well, right? And so there's a whole range of times where the author would use a middle, this middle passive form, not because they want to say that the subject is not doing the action at all, but they want to emphasize that when the subject is doing the action, that action is having effect upon them. And also, as you know, there's a whole range of words that are only in the middle passive as well. So this is not one of them, though, because we look it up in we look it up in the dictionary and what it actually means. And here's the entry. It's dia meridzo. If it was only ever in the middle or passive, then it would have the my ending, which it does not. So the omega ending here in the dictionary tells us that this word is used in the active sense, right? But here the author has chosen to use the passive or middle endings, and the question is why? And the answer is because this dividing, when they divided up their garment, Jesus's garments, they were dividing the garments among themselves. They were dividing them for themselves, right? When they crucify him, the subject here, the soldiers, they are crucifying Jesus. They're not crucifying themselves, right? So you see that word crucify is an action they are doing to somebody else, the unfortunate victim, obviously Jesus. Horrible event, which is our salvation, the glorious mystery of God. But the soldiers are doing this action to Jesus. And so that's why this is the active voice. When they're dividing his garments, though, they're dividing those garments for themselves, right? They're not dividing the garments so that Jesus can have them afterwards. They're dividing the garments so that they can take some home for themselves. And so that's why this verb is in the passive sense. So I believe I asked you to give an account of whether it was middle or passive and how you knew. And not too many of you attempted to do that, but here I'm kind of teaching you what you needed to think through, the steps you needed to think through so that you translated it. They are dividing the garments maybe among themselves, or just they're dividing their garments would have been okay translation. But you don't want to translate this. They crucified him and they were divided something, which wouldn't make any sense because you would have to deal with the words, the garments, his garments. How would you relate that to this sentence? I don't know. But the point is, this is clearly going to have a middle reference. This word is a middle reference, not a passive reference. And the reason why it's middle, is because the author wants to show that in their dividing, their action of dividing is reciprocal and that it is coming back upon themselves. They're dividing the garments for themselves, unlike the crucifixion, which they're doing only to Jesus. There's no sense in which that is coming back to them. Well, at least not until Acts chapter 2, when Peter gets up and says, "The one who you crucified." But that's not a grammatical issue. That's a theological issue. So, okay, that sentence is pretty straightforward, and it illustrates a verb that could be translated middle or passive that is obviously middle, and you understand from context why. Okay, here's the next sentence. This is Romans 8:14, that great chapter, Romans 8. Paul is talking about the Spirit and our justification, our union with Christ, and all that we have in him. And he says, so start with this color, Asoi gar pneumati theu agantai altoi huioi estin theu. Okay, and how do we translate that? Well, first of all, there's this phrase here, which most of you who translated it got it right. You had to look it up in the glossary, and it was there. You don't learn this until actually it'll be next semester, chapter 22, and you translate this as something like "as many as." So it's a pronoun, and you notice the oi ending here. So the pronoun is in the so it's nominative plural. So we have a plural ending, and we're going to expect therefore a third person plural verb, right? Because if you have nominative plural as the that's not I or you as the subject, we need a verb that's going to be third person plural, and that's exactly what we have in hagantai. So for as many as are led the Spirit of God, or really by the Spirit of God, these are sons of God. Okay, and we have a passive verb, well, a middle passive, and we need to decide if it's going to be middle or if it's going to be passive. We have that right here, that ontai ending, that is clearly right here, ontai, third person plural, right, which is what we have to have given here the subject. But the question is this subject, this is the subject, the as many as, is that doing the action, or is the action being done to that. And that's what we have to decide. Are we going to take this agantai here? Are we going to take this middle in such that as many as would have some role in performing the action, but that action would be, coming back to them, as in this sentence right here, with the that verb in the middle? Or is this going to be purely a passive sense, where the as many as are not doing the action at all? And the answer is it's going to be passive, because notice what we have here. And context tells us, as many as are led by God. Now we have an agent, the Spirit of God. That the Spirit of God here is the agent. It is the one, he is the one, the Spirit, you cannot say it. The Spirit is the one who is actually doing the leading here, right? The Spirit is leading. It's leading these, as many as. It's leading these guys, the nominative subject. And you don't have hupo, although it's translated the same way. This is a genitive that is the agent, is the marker of the agent. So we don't have the preposition that is clearly spelling out by the Spirit of God, but with the genitive that gives us the same basic idea. As many as are led by the Spirit of God, these are sons of God. And this is then clearly passive. It is not middle, it is passive. Okay. Next sentence here. Ekatos de peratzatai hupo tes idios epithumios. Okay, this is James 1:14, and here this is let me translate it, and we'll talk about how the passive or middle works itself out. Okay, so but each one is tempted by his own lusts or his own desires. This is the context where James is saying no one is tempted by God. God does not tempt anyone, but each one is tempted by his own desires. We haven't learned that form yet. That's his own. You'll get there, but it's in your glossary, so I didn't give it to you, I don't think. Now, what we have here, let's look at the subject. Each one here is, that's nominative singular, right? And it's not you or me doing the action, so therefore we are in third person. And because this is singular, we need our verb to be third person singular. And that is exactly what we have with this etai ending, right? So it's not the antai, more than one letter in the connecting vowel, signaling the plural. That's my easy way to remember it. It's the etai, the single epsilon, and that is it is singular, third person singular. So the question is, each one is tempted. Now, are we going to take this in a middle sense, where each one sort of tempts himself, or is it going to be a passive sense? Each one is tempted by another. And it is passive. Now, there is a sense in which one is tempting oneself, because what we're tempted by is our own lusts. But in terms of how this sentence works grammatically, we have this agent marker here, but the hupo, the most common preposition marking the agent, by his own lusts. So each one is tempted by his own lusts. Grammatically here, his own lusts is the agent of the temptation. His own lust is performing the action of the verb tempting. Who's he tempting? Each one. So that's how this works. And what we have here is passive. This is not to be translated middle, but is to be translated passive.